Some car companies know exactly how to sell me cars. Most of the time, they don't do it by showing me a list of specs and the features of the car itself. I mean, no, that's not how they get me. Instead, they sort out what my deep needs are, and then they use those needs to sell me cars. You see, the other day while I was watching a new Nissan Rogue commercial, I was struck by the shots that were used in the video. A family of four running with a picnic basket in an open field, taking a leisurely drive with the dog down by the water, driving through a forested area first, and all of those shots were done without a single other person or car in sight. Essentially, you're given the image of a vacation, taking a day trip, just going to some serene location to relax. It's funny, they use my deep need for rest to sell me cars. And they're not really alone. I mean, think about it, all those ads that pop up of remodeled kitchens and living rooms or dining rooms, bedrooms that look so comfy and quiet, all of it is just designed to make you feel like, oh, if I just had that comforter or that duvet, if we just repaint or buy those throw pillows, maybe then we could relax in a room like that. But the truth is, I don't need to buy a new car in order to go for a leisurely drive. And you don't need to repaint or purchase new throw pillows in order to take a slow Sunday morning to sip your coffee. Now, we just need to carve out space in our lives. But before we get any further into it, let me just orient you to the larger conversation here. In week 1 of this series, we talked about the greatest obstacle to us having the society we want to see and from being the people that we want to be, people of more love and joy and peace. And that number one obstacle is our culture of hurry. It's our busyness. Because being people of love and joy and peace who are patient and kind and good to others, that takes time. And so in order to slow down, we're embarking on this journey of following Jesus together to learn his disciplines and to emulate his habits. And we're doing it in order to create that space we all need. We've already talked about the habit of silence and solitude, but in this video, we're going to look at another habit of Jesus: Sabbath. The word Sabbath comes from the Hebrew word Shabbat, and it literally means to just stop for the purpose of rest and enjoyment. And in the Jewish and Christian traditions, it's always looked like taking a 24-hour period every week where you avoid all work. Jesus observed this day in his own life. He could be found in a synagogue worship service on the Sabbath or out and about enjoying leisurely strolls through fields with his friends. That second part kind of sounds like a car commercial. But on one occasion, Jesus' Sabbath practice got him into a huge argument. Here's how Peter, one of his closest friends, tells the story. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" The Pharisees, you see, were part of the religious leadership at the time, and they had determined on the basis of a few Jewish scriptures that were written by Moses, they determined that there were over 39 categories of activities that are considered working and therefore are forbidden to do on the Sabbath day. And each of those 39 categories had a bunch of subcategories right down to how many steps you should be allowed to take on the day. And it was important that you got all this right because God commanded it in the Big Ten, the 10 Commandments. Honor the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all of your work, but on the 7th day, no way, you shall not work. Over time, the restrictions became outrageous to the point where it was so much work for people to keep the Sabbath that it lost its meaning of rest. So Jesus makes a dangerous move. He ignored what the uber-religious were demanding. I mean, his response was so offensive that it actually sparked the plot to get him murdered. He answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, David entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat, and he gave some to his companions." In other words, remember that one time when your favorite historical figure was hungry? The high priest, the most religious guy in the land, saw David's need and let him eat the special bread that no one else was allowed to eat. You see, Abiathar knew what you should know, dear Pharisee, and that's that bread is for eating, and David needed to eat. Jesus' point was that the Sabbath is for resting, not rules. And people need rest. He said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Now, in those days, that was an incredibly combative statement to make. Following the Sabbath laws was the way you showed your devotion to God. Sabbath adherence was a person's gift to God. And yet here stands Jesus saying the Sabbath isn't your gift to God. It's God's gift to you. In fact, the idea of Sabbath has always been God's gift to people. Now, if Jesus saying it isn't enough, here's 3 reasons why I think this is true and why it might matter to you. Let's call the first reason rhythm. The ancient story of creation that Jesus grew up hearing was, like many other creation stories, a 7-day story. And if you've never read the story in Genesis 1 and 2, let me just give you the quick gist. God created light on day 1 and then spent the subsequent 5 days creating land and sea, sun, moon, and stars, the plants, the animals, and eventually humanity on day 6. But on the 7th day, God rested. Now, as a side note, whether God did or didn't create the cosmos in 7 days is not the point of the story. 7-day creation stories are how most ancient people groups talked about the origin of the universe. Whether that's how it went or not isn't really the point. Back to the question, why the 7th-day stretch? Was God tired? Did he wear himself out from all the creating? No. The significance to Jesus and his ancestors of the 7th-day stretch is that God was building into the fabric of the universe a natural rhythm of work and rest, work and rest, work and rest. 6 days of work and then 1 day of rest. It modeled for people the flow of creation. You can't continue to farm the same space of land with the same crop over and over and over again. You're going to wear the soil out. You see, every 6 or 7 years, you have to let that land regain its nutrients for a year. In the same way, in order to keep from burning out, every 6 days they believed they should take a day off. Just as much as the land needs rest to restore the soil, humanity needs rest to restore their soul. The first motivation for the 7th-day rest is that that's how God set it up. It's how the cosmos best function. And look, someone wise once said that if you go against the grain of the universe, you're going to get splinters. More on that in a minute. But for now, the first reason for seeing Sabbath as God's gift is that it's part of the rhythm that he put in place. The second reason was resistance. Now, you may not know this, but that Sabbath law that the Pharisees of Jesus' day tried to keep so hard that it was first given by a man named Moses, who's famous for leading the Israelites out of Egypt. Moses came down from a mountain with 2 stone tablets and 10 big commandments. The 4th one was honor the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. And the first time he delivered that commandment, he explained it as living in harmony with the universal rhythm. But Moses actually recited those 10 commandments a second time, over 40 years later, right before the people of Israel entered into the Promised Land. What's interesting, though, is that the second time that Moses relays the 10 commandments, he gives this Sabbath command a different motivation. He said, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there. You see, the group of people that Moses was talking to were the next generation after slavery. Their parents and their grandparents were slaves in Egypt, but they never were. They never experienced the 7-day-a-week onslaught of backbreaking labor, the whips and the weeping. They never experienced what it was like to be a cog in the great economic machine called Egypt, slaving away every day to put wealth into the hands of Pharaoh. So Moses had to instill in them a reminder of why the Sabbath mattered. Don't just keep it because it's the way you were made, living in line with the universe. No, now he says, keep the Sabbath as a reminder that you're no longer a slave. Taking a day off is your resistance against the system. For 1 day a week, I'm not going to be a cog in some Egyptian machine of more buildings and more storehouses and more grain and more gold and more. Your Sabbath is a statement that you're not a human doing, you're a human being. That you don't exist purely to put money into the pockets of other people or even your own. 1 day a week, I can stop being a cog in the great economic machine. I'm not a slave to it. Sabbath is God's gift that pulls us out of that every week to remind us who we truly are. Which actually leads to the third piece, rest. And this is where things get spiritual for me. Those first two reasons are kind of fun and almost hippie-like, right? I mean, it's about going with the grain of the universe, man, and standing up to the consumeristic machine. But the third motivation for Sabbath is personal. I won't put this on you, but I will say for me that there are two things that get in the way of my Sabbath. Two things that keep me from practicing a 24-hour period of rest. And they really both boil down to trust. Trust in what I can accumulate and trust in what I can achieve. One of the things that keeps me from truly unplugging, and I mean that both figuratively and literally, one of the things that keeps me from unplugging is my trust in accumulation. That if I can just get more stuff, more experiences, more things, then I'll be able to truly rest. It's me giving into the way that advertisers play on my need for Sabbath. Instead of just taking a Sabbath, I busy myself by shopping or planning for all those things that I think would give me rest. Now, what's that got to do with trust? Well, for me, deep down, there's this unrest in my soul that doesn't trust God for happiness. I don't trust that I'll be able to rest well, and so I go searching for stuff to accumulate that will give rest to my soul. What's ironic is that it's actually the perpetual process of accumulating more stuff that keeps me from truly resting with what I have in the first place. Taking a Sabbath, a true disconnect from the accumulation game, begins to restore my trust in God and that He's given me everything I already need. True rest isn't around the corner of the next purchase or the next vacation. It's taking 24 hours every week to rest in what God has already given me. The other thing that keeps me from truly resting is the belief that my ultimate value comes from my personal achievements or other people's approval in my life. I mean, I struggle to take a Sabbath, a full day of rest, because I'm constantly checking my messages, doing little tasks that I think are going to get me ahead for the coming work week, making sure I'm constantly available to any and everybody all of the time instead of just taking a break. And if I'm honest, I think that if I just hit enough of my professional goals and produce enough, then I'll be able to rest. I usually tell myself, oh, this is just a season, it's just for right now, but after chasing and reaching my goals for over a decade, at some point you'd think I'd wise up and admit to myself, it's never going to be enough. Rest isn't coming around the corner of more people, more views, more subscribers, more donors, more videos, more conversations, more groups, more. Rest isn't coming around the corner of the next benchmark. The goalposts will always move. The target will keep shifting. Practicing Sabbath is about taking one day a week to remember that I am not my work. It hits to the core of my identity. It hits to the core of my security as a person. That's why I say it's deeply spiritual. And this is why the message of Jesus matters so much to me. I mean, the practice of taking one day off a week isn't about me trying to please God. God's not up in heaven wondering, hey, don't they know it's Sunday? Don't they know I need somebody to sing to me and read my special book? He didn't set up Sunday for himself. He's God. He doesn't need it. He doesn't need us. And yet he loves us so much that it pains him to see his creation constantly hurting itself, going against the grain, living like a cog in the consumeristic machine, believing that accumulation, achievement, or the approval of others is what's going to bring rest. I mean, I'm constantly choosing this slow death of slivers. And that's why Jesus came. There's this famous African bishop who once said that our hearts are restless until they find their rest in God. Jesus came to reconnect us with that God that our busy, disorienting lives have disconnected us from. And that disconnection has resulted in so many slivers. I mean, it's quite literally killing us. Not only are we more stressed out and emotionally unhealthy than ever before, but it's hindering the growth of love and joy and peace. I mean, the fact that we aren't well rested means we're not patient or at peace with one another. We have very little capacity to be kind or to do good in the world. I mean, no wonder things are a mess today. But that's why Jesus came, to prove that God still wants to be connected to you, to show you that your value and worth don't come from your accumulation or your achievement, but ultimately they come from knowing that you are loved so much that He thought you were worth dying for. I mean, getting a few extra hours in, a few more texts in, a few more emails in, a few more tasks done, shopping for that new trinket or trail or vacation, it's not the path to true deep rest. Jesus is. And He's inviting you to follow Him so that you can replenish your soil, so that you can find rest for your soul. I mean, I wonder how much more loving, joyful, and at peace I would be. I wonder how much more patient, kind, and good to others we could be if we took one day a week and stopped, got back into the rhythm of the cosmos, stood up to the machine, and believed that God's love really is for you and me. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.